I'm Tracy Sable. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, a fourth indictment. More legal trouble for former President Donald Trump. We have a report and reaction. Message of Mary. Why the Holy Father says we elevate our own lives when we serve others. Crackdown by China. Analysis of the new guidelines restricting religious freedom in the communist country. And looking towards heaven. We celebrate the Feast of the Assumption and the founding of EWTN. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Well, thank you for being with us on the Solemnity of the Assumption of Mary. Our top story tonight, former President Donald Trump is now facing his fourth indictment, this time in Georgia. He, along with 18 co-defendants, including Rudy Giuliani and former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, are facing racketeering charges, all in connection with efforts to allegedly overturn the 2020 presidential election results in that state. And we have team coverage tonight. White House correspondent Owen Jensen will join us in just a moment with reaction from other presidential candidates. But we begin with Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales, who joins us now in the studio with the latest on the charges. Eric.
Well, good evening, Tracy. The indictment lists 18 felony counts against former President Donald Trump and 23 counts against 18 co-defendants. They all stem from a 2.5-year criminal investigation into Trump's alleged interference in the 2020 Georgia presidential election, which he lost.
The state's role in this process is essential to the functioning of our democracy.
The 98-page indictment accuses the former president and 18 others of, quote, unlawfully conspired and endeavored to conduct and participate in a criminal enterprise. 13 counts, which include racketeering and conspiracy, are now being added to the other 3 cases against Trump. 4 charges from the January 6th insurrection case, including 2 counts of obstructing official proceeding. 40 from the classified documents case, including 32 counts of violation of the Espionage Act, and 34 counts of falsifying business records in the hush money case, bringing a total of 91 charges against the former president.
It is now the duty of my office to prove these charges in the indictment beyond a reasonable doubt at trial.
In a statement, Trump's attorney called the grand jury presentation, quote, one-sided. Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan, a Trump ally, tweeted out, quote, today's indictment is just the latest political attack in the Democrats' witch hunt against President Trump. He did nothing wrong. And House Speaker Kevin McCarthy saying, quote, justice should be blind, but Biden has weaponized government against his leading political opponent to interfere in the 2024 election. Democratic leadership, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries and Senator Chuck Schumer put out a joint statement stating, quote, this latest indictment details how Mr. Trump led a months-long plot pushing the big lie to steal an election, undermine our democracy, and overturn the will of the people of Georgia. The Fulton County District Attorney has ordered Trump and his alleged co-conspirators to turn themselves in or surrender voluntarily by next Friday. Meanwhile, the former president says that he will hold a news conference next Monday to present a report from his team regarding his claims about fraud in Georgia's election. Tracy?
Okay, thank you, Eric. Well, President Joe Biden offers no immediate comment about the case against Donald Trump. Meantime, his son Hunter Biden is facing his own legal troubles, now being investigated by a special counsel. And while President Biden may be tight-lipped, others are commenting. White House correspondent Owen Jensen continues our team coverage tonight. Owen?
Tracy, as the race for the White House in 2024 continues, some candidates seeking the Oval Office made it very clear today where they stand on the indictments.
The charges facing former President Donald Trump in Georgia raise more questions about the presidential campaign. Republican candidate Vivek Ramaswamy tweets, "Here we go again, another disastrous Trump indictment." He adds, prosecutors should not be deciding U.S. presidential elections. And former Congressman Will Hurd, who is also running for president, writes, "Another day, another indictment, and another example of how the former president's baggage will hand Joe Biden re-election if Trump is the Republican nominee." But Brooke Rollins, the head of the America First Policy Institute, warns a weaponized government is no longer just a threat. It's a dark and dangerous reality.
Mr. President! Mr. President! Mr. President! President!
Sir! President Joe Biden remained silent this morning when he left the White House. He flew off an Air Force One to Wisconsin to speak about the economy and trying to turn his economic policies into votes, visiting a company in Milwaukee that will start producing EV charging stations domestically. He's celebrating the one-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act in the battleground state, which he narrowly won in 2020.
It's time to build American products in America.
The president made his comments despite inflation and high prices still eating away at paychecks. In just days, Republicans seeking to oust him from office will hold a debate in Milwaukee, no doubt blaming higher prices on the current president.
And think about this. All that area they got to plow up, they can't do it now because they don't know how many bodies are there. They don't know what's left. Imagine being a mom or dad, wondering where your child is. Imagine being a husband or wife, a mother or father. It's really tough stuff.
Also in Milwaukee, President Biden said that he and the First Lady will soon travel to Hawaii to make sure everyone there has what they need. Right now, he just doesn't want to get in the way. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Our government officials in Nicaragua are blocking 2 priests from returning to the country after they attended World Youth Day. Both are pastors in the Diocese of Leon. No word as to if and when they may be allowed to return to their parishes. While the Chinese Communist Party is announcing new restrictions on religious freedom that will go into effect next month. As we reported yesterday, the crackdown includes limiting all religious activities to official venues and displaying religious symbols indoors only. And joining us now to talk more about this is Sehun Kim, senior correspondent of East and South Asian Affairs at the Global Strat View. Sehun, great to be with you, my friend. A lot to get to, but first, I want to get your initial reaction to these new measures by the CCP and remind us, how different would this be from what's already in place?
Well, Tracy, it's really not surprising, given the fact that something like this has been going on in full force since the beginning of the Chinese Communist Party itself. But ever since Xi Jinping came into power in 2012, the mass crackdowns particularly against Christians, has been skyrocketing. Things like the even changing of the Bible recently, where it says in the Book of John, where Jesus, it says on the Chinese Communist Party's Bible that Jesus actually condemned the woman and actually threw stones at her, as for what I remember. And so something like this is not surprising at all to me, or should it be to anybody else? And there has been a lot of deals that's been going on to initiate something like this, and my initial reaction also to this was that it's only going to get worse from this point.
Yeah, and also, Sehun, I mean, can you explain the part of those restrictions, related to getting these venues registered? What's behind that, and how complicated will that process be?
Well, it's very complicated, and again, we're also seeing the Chinese Communist Party weaponizing bureaucracy and all types of legal issues against the church, and particularly when you see things like things like the charges of business fraud against Protestant pastors for simply receiving tithes or offerings from their people, or even you see the crackdown against underground Catholics who have nothing but dedicated to the church and to the cause. And so, if anything, the bureaucracy itself, the weaponization of it, will make it virtually impossible for any genuine Christian in China to practice their faith full force.
Sehun, what's been the reaction from religious groups in China? I mean, have you heard anything?
So, as per my knowledge, the religious groups in China are often and unsurprisingly silenced all the time, and a lot of times they are barred from even talking to anybody in the outside world. But one thing is for sure is that they are fighting hard, and particularly with the underground Christians, even though they're experiencing constant surveillance by the government's attempt to change the biblical structures, where it makes it impossible in certain certain times for the current generation to pass on the right the versions of the Bible to the next generation. And so it is very difficult. But from what I understand, the Christians in China are fighting very, very hard. And this goes the same for Uyghur Muslims, for Tibetan Buddhists, even some of the hidden Falun Gong practitioners who have been holding on to their faith since the beginning, essentially since the beginning of their sprout in the CCP-run China.
Sehun, we're almost out of time, but I'm curious. I mean, what is the end game here, and what can the international community do, if anything?
The end game is simple. I mean, it's to make the CCP above all religions. They essentially want to get rid of all religions in China, or get them to basically come to the same conclusion that CCP itself is greater than God or any other deity that's believed by anyone that holds any form of religion. And so, what the international community should be doing is to constantly pressure their government to address this issue, but also at the same time, realistically, we should be looking in every avenue to restrict all types of economic relations with the CCP, because in reality, money is actually the only factor that's helping the CCP to do what it's doing right now and to survive.
Well, Sehun, thank you so much for coming on, my friend. Thanks for weighing in. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
We have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including Speak Up, a new initiative regarding free speech on college campuses. U.S. universities are emphasizing free speech. It is part of an initiative aimed at helping students learn how to express themselves despite differences of opinion. The University of Notre Dame is among the participating schools. Well, a group of Jewish parents and schools have filed a lawsuit challenging a law in California. The measure excludes religious entities from using special education funds to serve children with disabilities. While those resources are not available to religious schools, they are used at secular private schools. We go now to Maury Litwack, Managing Director of the Orthodox Union, which is aiding the families in this case. Maury, so good to have you on. Quickly, for those that aren't familiar with Loftman versus California, can you bring us up to speed on the case?
Well, the federal law states that through something called IDEA funding, that parents should be able to really choose the school of their choice when it comes to those parents who have special needs students. So if, for example, you have a special needs student and you need funding or resources for that, IDEA funding is supposed to be almost portable, allowing you to take that funding and utilize it whether or not it's in a public school, or if you can't utilize a public school, using it in a non-public school. Unfortunately, in the state of California, there's something really bizarre going on where they are providing that funding, that IDEA funding, that funding for children to private schools, as long as they are not religious schools. If they're religious schools, no. But if they're religious schools, no. But if you are a private secular school, you are allowed to have the funding, which is only something happening in California and is what the heart of this lawsuit is all about.
Yeah, Maury, last year the Supreme Court struck down a Maine law that excluded religious schools from the state tuition assistance program. That said, I mean, how different is your case from Carson versus Macon, if at all?
It's very similar, and that's one of the reasons this case was brought by the Beckett law firm, which really specializes in this and does incredible work around the country in righting this sort of injustice against religious institutions, religious organizations, religion. And when you look at that case in the Supreme Court, what the Supreme Court was saying then was that in Maine, that if there was a voucher program that could be utilized, parents had the right to use that for faith-based schools. You couldn't explicitly exclude that, as Maine was doing, and saying, well, we'll give it to parents, and if the parents want to send their kids to a private school, that's okay, as long as the school isn't religious. The Supreme Court said that is unconstitutional. You cannot exclude religious institutions like that. You can't discriminate against parents. And so the California lawsuit looks exactly very similar to what happened in the Supreme Court, and that's what we're fighting against. Really something that at this point is unconstitutional, what's taking place in California.
Yeah, you know, I want to bring this up because critics may say this, you know, why not just send your children to a public school if they have more resources and the funding? What would be your response And why do the families involved in this case feel that's not an option for them?
Well, first and foremost, there is sort of this knee-jerk reaction in America that if you want to send your kids to a school, that's fine, and the government will pay for it as long as it's a public school, and then nobody else should receive that funding. That's really falling apart at this point. Around the country, we're seeing programs passed that are challenging that, and parents are happy about it, and legislators are happy about it. In this case in particular, when even those opponents hear this, they are outraged about this because, again, the state of California is allowing this for private schools as long as they're not religious. And so what we are seeing here is that really this is turning conventional wisdom on its head, but also the personal stories of parents is what's really at the heart of this. So, for example, a Jewish parent who's raising their child within the Jewish faith and sending their kids to a school that isn't Jewish faces unprecedented challenges, especially when we're talking about children with special needs, so that we have documented cases of those students going to a public school because they can't go to a Jewish school, and now they're eating non-kosher. Now they're not able to celebrate their holidays, their religious holidays. This is something that anybody of any faith should be outraged about that's taking place in California today.
Maury, before you let go, we have about 30 seconds left or so. Curious, what is next for this case, and also what could be maybe the larger implications to all of this for even other faiths?
Well, we're working with an incredible group of parents who are dedicated to fighting this. And we're appealing this to the Ninth Circuit, and we'll continue this fight as far as we have to take it, because it is about injustice. It is about discrimination. It is about the Supreme Court saying this is wrong, and the California courts literally ignoring this, challenging it. And so we really are proud about the fact that this fight continues. But I think that if you're listening to this in any other state, around the country, in any of the other 49 states, you should say this fight's for you as well, because it is wrong to discriminate. It is wrong to exclude faiths from their ability to practice. And in this case, it is wrong to do that with children with special needs. This is just, it's gone too far. So we need to win this case. This is really about religious freedom in America.
And Maury, we're going to leave it right there. Thank you so much for coming on. We're going to continue to follow this case.
Thank you.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, Mary's example. Pope Francis reminds the faithful of the importance of serving others. Plus, EWTN celebrates the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin and a special anniversary for the network. Pope Francis reminds the faithful that by adopting a, quote, spirit of service and praise, we can be just like the Blessed Virgin Mary.
Continuiamo a sperare e a pregare perché Dio è Lui che guida la storia.
And a special talk for the Solemnity of the Assumption. The Holy Father says Mary showed care for others and gave praise to God when she traveled 90-plus miles to be with her pregnant cousin. Pope Francis added that helping those around us can be exhausting, but will be worth it. Pope Francis also prayed for peace in Ukraine and all war-torn regions, saying that the noise of weapons drowns out attempts at dialogue. He added that we should never become discouraged because history is guided by God. While the Holy Father's address came on a special day in Rome, EWTN News Vatican journalist Matteo Ciofi has more on the history of the Solemnity of the Assumption.
Today in Italy we celebrate Ferragosto, a day that commemorates the Assumption of the Virgin Mary into heaven. Being the mother of Jesus and being preserved from the stain of original sin, Mary was taken up into heaven. The various Christian denominations diverge on the questions of Mary's death. Orthodox and Armenians celebrate only the Dormition of Mary on August 15th. It is called the Dormition because Mary would not really have died but fell into a deep sleep. Protestants, on the other hand, do not believe in Mary's Assumption. It was Pope Pius XII on November 1st, 1950, during the Holy Year, who solemnly proclaimed for the Catholic Church as a dogma of faith the Assumption of the Virgin Mary. He declared that the Immaculate Mother of God, the ever Virgin Mary, having completed the course of her earthly life, was assumed body and soul into heavenly glory. The term Ferragosto, on the other hand, derives from the Latin expression Ferie Augusti, Augustan rest, which indicated a holiday established by the first Roman Emperor Augustus in 18 BC. In the popular Italian tradition, Ferragosto is a holiday that usually coincides with the vacation season. As with other holidays, it is usually celebrated outside the city, especially at the seaside. Ferragosto in the Vatican has always been a special day. For about 60 years, the various popes traveled during the warmer months to Castel Gandolfo, a small village outside Rome in front of the Lake Albano, and spent some time in the summer residence for the popes. In fact, the day of Ferragosto included the recitation of the Angelus from the window of the Apostolic Palace in Castel Gandolfo, where the Pope was staying, and not from St. Peter's Square. Pope Francis ended this long and historic tradition in 2014. On that occasion, in fact, the Holy Father was in South Korea for an apostolic trip, and in the following years has never gone to the summer residence of Castel Gandolfo, preferring to remain in the Vatican during the summer break. And so, the traditional recitation of the Angelus away from the Vatican has been interrupted.
Benediciamo Maria con la nostra preghiera.
Celebrating the Assumption last year, Pope Francis addressed the faithful gathered in St. Peter's Square. He recalled that she shows us that heaven is within reach, if we too do not give in to sin, if we praise God in humility and serve others generously. She, our Mother, takes us by the hand. She accompanies us to glory. She invites us to rejoice as we think of heaven. In Rome, Matteo Ciofi, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, the Solemnity of the Assumption of Mary has been the subject of paintings for centuries, including one work from the 1600s currently at the National Gallery of Art right here in Washington, D.C. We go now to Jem Sullivan, Associate Professor of Practice in Catechetics at the Catholic University of America and author of The Beauty of Faith. Jem, great to have you back on. So for how long has the Assumption of Mary been depicted in art?
Thank you, Tracy. It's good to be back. It was Pope Pius XII who, in 1950, defined the dogma of Mary's Assumption. But well before that, belief in Mary's bodily assumption was in Catholic devotion for centuries. And from that long-held belief, painters and sculptors, musicians and poets have for centuries brought to life Mary's Assumption in paint and stone and song and in words. So well before its formal definition by the Church, we have many beautiful hymns and works of art that offer a visual catechesis on Mary's Assumption.
And Jem, tell us about this just beautiful image of Mary's Assumption from the National Gallery of Art.
Sure, Tracy. This scene is a sketch based on an altarpiece completed by Peter Paul Rubens, the master Baroque painter of the 17th century. And Rubens painted scenes with movement and intense color, and this replica is a good example of his style. It was likely completed by his assistants in his studio. We see God assuming Mary into heaven as she's carried up by a host of angels. Everything in the painting is moving to where two angels hold a wreath of flowers. They are ready to crown Mary as Queen of Heaven. And below them is Mary's empty tomb, surrounded by a group of Old Testament figures and apostles. It is thought that the gospel women named Mary are present in this scene. And in this group, one of the apostles stands with his arms outstretched to heaven in praise of God. His perspective is meant to be our perspective as we join the Church's celebration of this moment when Mary's earthly life draws to a close.
And Jem, before I let you go, tell us, what does this artistic vision of the Assumption tell us?
Tracy, the Catechism tells us that God's work of assuming Mary, body and soul, into heaven continues the great divine work in the life of the woman that God chose to bear his divine Son, Jesus, into the world. In a way, Mary's entire life, from her Immaculate Conception to the Annunciation to the death and resurrection of Jesus, her Son, her entire life was a preparation for her Assumption, body and soul, into heavenly glory. God's gift, as it were, to Mary at the end of her earthly life. And so this artist's creative vision reminds us that God desires that we follow in Mary's footsteps. And the final destiny of life is to be with God for all eternity, to join in that endless praise of God, who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, in the company of the angels, the saints, and Mary, Mother of God, Mother of the Church, and our Mother in faith.
Oh, Jem, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of that with us. We really appreciate it. God bless you.
You're most welcome, Tracy. Thank you.
And finally, tonight, today is also the 42nd anniversary of the on-air launch of EWTN.
In the name of Jesus, who is Lord, may his eternal word be proclaimed.
It was August 15th, 1981 when EWTN began broadcasting, and we are so very thankful today and every day for the gift that Mother Angelica brought to the world. And we thank you for watching. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, now known as X, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sable. Good night, and God bless.